Today's passage is another really well-known one, but as the old English saying goes, familiarity breeds contempt. In other words, it's so familiar, we become complacent, thinking, oh, I know this one, and we fail to look at it more closely. So let's take a moment to get inside the skin of it. So if you can, close your eyes and allow your imagination to engage with the story, and let's see what God reveals to you. I'm going to remind us of a few things and ask a few questions, and then I'll share the passage. So this is the story of Jesus' birth, and it comes right after Zechariah's prophecy. Now remember that years before, God had given the promised land to the Israelites, having sworn to Abraham that it would be theirs forever if only they obeyed his ways. But now both the land and the people are being ruled by a brutal foreign power. The Romans were cruel and held little regard for local custom and values. The nation was groaning and longing for a rescuer. And then the all-powerful Caesar Augustus decided to count every one of his subjects throughout his vast empire. The result? Forced movement all over the nation, as everyone was required to travel to their ancestral town, with apparently no respite given to the vulnerable, such as heavily pregnant women. So here's a question. What do you think the mood was among the people? How did they feel about this census? And what might the consequences have been for not journeying to your hometown to complete it? The trip that Mary and Joseph had to take between Nazareth and Bethlehem was 80 miles, and it was not a safe journey. Can you imagine what the road was like? Where did they stay along the way? How long did it take? How grueling was it for a heavily pregnant girl? And the passage mentions Joseph traveled with his fiancée Mary, reminding us that they were not married. But as they were both descendants of David, it's reasonable to assume that other members of their family would also have been traveling to Bethlehem as well. Are they traveling with them, or are they traveling alone? Why does Luke not mention them? And why would no one take them in when they arrived in Bethlehem? Isn't it odd that there was no room at the inn, when the village would presumably have been filled with at least some of their close relatives, especially in a culture where pregnant women would normally be cherished? Yet Mary was forced to give birth in a stable. I wonder, would there have been room for her if she had been married? And there's no mention of others made at Jesus' birth. Why? John's birth was so public, so rejoiced in, so marveled in, and so rooted in community. By contrast, Jesus' birth has no mention of community, and instead it takes angels and strangers to welcome him in. Why? Now, as I share the passage, allow your heart to engage with it through your imagination in a new way. So Luke writes, during those days, the Roman Emperor Caesar Augustus ordered that the first census be taken throughout his empire. Quirinius was the governor of Syria at the time, and everyone had to travel to his or her hometown to complete the mandatory census. So Joseph and his fiancée Mary left Nazareth, a village in Galilee, and journeyed to their hometown in Judea, to the village of Bethlehem, King David's ancient home. They were required to register there since they were both direct descendants of David. Mary was pregnant and nearly ready to give birth. And when they arrived in Bethlehem, Mary went into labor, and there she gave birth to her firstborn son. After wrapping the newborn baby in strips of cloth, they laid him in a feeding trough, since there was no available space in any upper room in the village. Now, there are, of course, no right or wrong answers to our questions, or to any other questions that the passage might prompt you to ask. In fact, it's not the answers that are important, it's the asking that makes the difference. Because I find that the questions are like a gateway for the passage to make the leap in my heart from being a two-dimensional story to being a living event that was experienced by real humans at a real point in history with real consequences. And it's at that point that it begins to come alive for me. Father, I ask that you would teach us new ways to read and engage with your word so that it would really start to live in our hearts. Amen.